How would I adapt the Flash into the DCU? Of all of DC's core heroes, I feel like coming up with a concept for the DCU Flash is probably the most interesting one. We've seen a couple of live-action Flash adaptations over the years. He got his own show in the 90s, then another show in the 2010s, and then a movie in 2023. Because the Flash movie flopped in 2023, I figured it would be a while before we see him in the DCU, and recently James Gunn confirmed he won't be showing up in the universe for at least 2 years. This makes sense to let the character breathe, while James Gunn rebuilds the DC brand so that when the Flash comes back, he'll be stronger than ever. Because his presence won't be felt for a while, we really have no idea how he'll be adapted into this universe. All we have is this frame of what appears to be Wally West Kid Flash from a vision of the future in Creature Commandos. Other than that though, we have pretty much nothing. So in today's video, like the last couple How I Do videos, I'm going to be taking what we know about the character in DCU and making a concept for how I would do their character in the universe. Obviously, like I mentioned with the Flash, we don't know much, so I pretty much started from scratch in this one. Without further ado, let's just jump right into how I would do the Flash in the DCU. So our first project that will be introducing the Flash in the DCU is a Flash animated series. Before I get into details on what this show would be about though, I feel like we have to discuss Barry Allen and how he'll play into this universe. And honestly, I'm basing a lot of this off of Hal Jordan. So we know there's a Lantern show coming out next year, and Hal Jordan will be a veteran Lantern legend, and he'll be a much older mentor figure to John Stewart. Hal is being played by a 59-year-old Kyle Chandler, so it's clear that he's going to be past his prime, and that he's been doing this for a very long time. The reason I bring this up is because Hal and Barry have always been close in age in the comics. Not only that, but they also debuted really close to one another, with Barry debuting in 1956 and Hal debuting in 1959. They've always been pretty closely tied together, and they also have a very close friendship with one another. Because of their relationship in the comics and them always being pretty much the same age, I think it's likely that they'll be the same age in this continuity as well, or at least similar age. So to be honest, in the DCU present, I think Barry Allen is probably in his mid-50s. I know that will definitely piss some people off, but this is just a prediction based off of the little context we have, and honestly I could be very wrong. So anyway, now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about this Flash animated show. So because I think Barry Allen is in his 50s, I'd like to see a prequel animated show centered on his prime years as the Flash. I'm thinking he could be in his mid to late 30s to mid 40s in this show, so he's still a veteran hero and has been doing this a while, but he's not some old man hero. For this show, I honestly wouldn't go with a single story. I'd have it be a sort of villain of the week animated show, kind of similar to Batman and Superman the animated series, chronicling Flash's middle years against his most prominent villains. I would also have it set across multiple years, so I wouldn't have it set in one specific timeline. I'd have it jump around the Flash's timeline so that we can see his career evolve. And also, I'd focus on what I consider to be the big three of Flash villains: the Rogues, Gorilla Grodd, and Reverse Flash. I'd have a couple episodes of Flash going up against the Rogues, with Captain Cold, Heatwave, Mirror Master, Golden Glider, and Captain Boomerang serving as the primary Rogues. Show their first confrontations with the Flash, and set them up as recurring antagonists in Central City. They're not world-ending threats by any means, but they cause enough damage that the Flash has to intervene. And then of course, you have to do a couple episodes where the Flash is dealing with his arch nemesis, the Reverse Flash. I'd probably go with an original story here. I definitely don't want to see Flashpoint again. We saw it in the TV show, we saw it in the movie, albeit without Eobard Thawne, but also the animated film. There's other Reverse Flash stories that we can tell. Then, for the last couple episodes, I would introduce Wally West as Kid Flash. Obviously, this would have to be later in Barry's career, considering Wally will most likely be in the Teen Titans film as a teenager or at the oldest early 20s, so I'd probably have him around the age of 14 in this show. For the last couple episodes, I'd have Barry and Wally travel to Gorilla City to stop a revolution by none other than Gorilla Grodd. I love Grodd, and he's already being set up to seemingly have a big role in the DCU. I think it would be cool to see Barry take on a young Gorilla Grodd before he becomes extremely powerful and put a stop to his revolution. I feel like a common misconception among casual DC fans is that Gorilla City is full of all these hateful gorillas that despise humans, when in actuality, most of the gorillas in Gorilla City are peaceful, they're just isolationists and don't want to be discovered by anyone. Grodd is the exception, but he does have a lot of loyal followers. So ultimately, I'd have Barry go to Gorilla City to help the current leader Solivar keep his throne, putting an end to the young Grodd's revolution, at least for now. But yeah, I'd have this show as a semi-anthology, going over important parts of the Flash's history, allowing us to know Barry Allen a little bit better. Next, we have The Flash, the Animated Series Season 2. Rather than doing a sort of villain of the week show like we did for Season 1, I think Season 2 we could expand on the Flash mythos and Flash family a lot more. Because of this, I want our Season 2 to focus on the Flash storyline, Terminal Velocity. Now, I know what a lot of you Flash fans are thinking. Terminal Velocity is a story that focuses on Wally West's era as the Flash, but I don't think it makes a huge difference if you change the Flash to be Barry Allen. At the end of the day, the story focuses on the Flash family, the introduction of the Speed Force, and also the villain organization Cobra. I feel like you can replace Wally's arc with Barry's, and Bart Allen or Impulse's arc with Kid Flash, that being Wally West. This story is kind of hard to get into without completely spoiling it, so I'll just issue a quick spoiler warning, but the general gist of the story is that the Flash is being consumed by some otherworldly force, which is then later called the Speed Force. He seeks the guidance of Max Mercury, one of the first speedsters and perhaps the person who understands it the most. Simultaneously, the villain Cobra and his organization launch a plot to destroy the world with a global earthquake. So, the book is essentially a history lesson on the Speed Force and also the Flash family coming together to stop Cobra from destroying the city. One of the main reasons I love this story and want to see it adapted is because of the overall inclusion of the Flash family. Before I read this story, I knew who Max Mercury was, but I'm not gonna lie, I kind of thought he was a D-list scrub character. After I went through the Wade run the first time a couple years ago, and then subsequently the Impulse run, I really came around to loving this character. I won't get into spoilers, but his origin and the way he comes around to learning of the Speed Force is fascinating, and I'd love to see it played out on screen. We also know that he is officially part of the DCU timeline, as he made an appearance in the murals that James Gunn posted on his Instagram. It also is the introduction to the concept of the Speed Force, and Mark Waid does a really good job of explaining what it actually is. But yeah, I'd have this season focus on the Flash family. Barry Allen as the Flash, Jay Garrick as the original Flash, Max Mercury as a mentor figure, Jess Chambers, the Lady Flash, and Wally West as Kid Flash. In the end, Barry becomes one with the Speed Force to stop Cobra, with the initial thought that doing this would result in his death. Instead, he returns stronger than ever and reunites with the Flash family. Okay, so now let's talk about our first DCU Flash movie, with that being The Return of Barry Allen. Real quick, I'm gonna have to explain why Wally West is now taking over the mantle of the Flash for this movie. So I think the first Justice League movie will feature Barry Allen as the main Flash. I think the lineup will consist of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Barry, John Stewart, Martian Manhunter, and honestly, I'm not sure who else, but I think those characters are all locks. We also know Hal is going to be an old man in Lanterns, and that he'll be mentoring John, who I think we can safely assume will be working alongside David Cornsweat's Superman one day. And to be honest, I don't think Hal is going to survive the Green Lantern show, but I'll get into that more in my Green Lantern video. So anyway, I think Barry will be one of the last good heroes of his generation, and he'll be part of the first Justice League movie, but at the end he'll make a sacrifice to save the team. I apologize to my Barry fans out there, but I feel like Barry and Hal will end up being the same age, and if Hal is already old, I think Barry will be too, and you can only keep these guys around for so long. Besides, I gave him 2 animated shows, and he is the main Flash in the first Justice League movie. I did my best to keep fans of both Flashes happy, but at the end of the day, I'm biased towards Wally West, so forgive me. So anyway, after a short stint with the Teen Titans in their first film, Wally is confronted with the fact that his mentor and best friend is now gone. He also realizes that the twin cities of Keystone and Central City need a Flash, so he reluctantly takes on the mantle. Before we get into it, I will say I'm going over spoilers for this story, so if you do want to read this and not get any spoilers, I would skip to right here. So this movie would take a lot of the themes of Mark Waid's Flash run. This run takes place right after Barry's death in Crisis on Infinite Earths. One of the biggest things Wally struggles with in that run is living up to Barry's legacy. He feels like the shoes are just too big to fill and that he simply isn't good enough. Wally obviously had really looked up to Barry and is also dealing with the loss of him as well. So in The Return of Barry Allen, one day Wally is having dinner with the Garricks, and as the title addresses, Barry Allen returns. One moment he's dead, and the next he's at the front door of Jay and Joan Garrick's home. Obviously Wally is thrilled with this at first. His best friend is back, but he kind of flips back and forth on whether he actually believes this is Barry Allen. You can tell he wants to believe that his mentor and best friend returned from the dead, but there's just something off about him. Wally also begins to lose his confidence as he worries he isn't worthy of the Flash moniker and doesn't feel like he has a place as the Flash anymore now that Barry has returned. However, as the story continues to unravel, Barry's actions become much more unhinged. He begins insisting to criminals that he is the one and only Flash, he has violent outbursts, and overall is just not behaving like Barry at all. And the reason he isn't behaving like Barry is because he's not Barry Allen. It turns out that this is actually Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. In the future, he had reconstructive surgery to give him the appearance of Barry Allen because he was his biggest fan. The reason he travels back in time is to not only become Barry Allen, but become the Flash that everybody knows and loves. Once he finds out he's destined to become the Flash's greatest enemy though, he goes completely insane, and that's part of what we see in this book. He even believes he actually is Barry Allen when he goes back in time due to amnesia fogging his memory upon arriving in the 20th century. So when Hal's ring detects he's telling the truth about everything upon returning, there's even more reason to believe this is actually Barry Allen. I love this story. I think it's the greatest Flash story ever written, and I think it would be a perfect segue story for Wally West to become the Flash. He's constantly feeling like he doesn't live up to Barry's legacy, then Barry returns and he feels even more so like he's not good enough, but then he's the one who figures out Barry is actually the Reverse Flash and he takes him down. I think this is the perfect origin story for Wally West coming into his own as the new Flash. I really do think that this is the perfect Flash story for a movie. For side characters, I'd love to see Jay Garrick and Max Mercury return in supporting roles, reprising their roles from the second season of our Flash animated series. There's one fight scene in this arc where Wally, Max, and Jay team up to take on the Reverse Flash, so I'd love to see that get an adaptation here. For the most part though, I'd have them be side characters. At the end of the day, this is a Wally story, so seeing them help out in the third act would be cool, but not the entire movie because because I feel like that would get a bit redundant. Also, Jay Garrick gets completely roughed up by Eobard in this. Like, I think he's in a full body cast at one point in this story. I think it'd be cool to see that. Show how powerful the Reverse Flash is, that he's taking out Wally's mentor figures. I'd also have Linda Park in the story as well. She's Wally's main love interest, and it would be odd not to include her, so she'd be in here. And then I'd introduce somebody who would start off as an ally in the Central City Police Department, but would evolve into a good friend, and that would be Hunter Zolomon. So in this movie, Hunter Zolomon would be a criminal profiler assigned specifically to metahuman cases, and he'd grow into a good friend of Wally's throughout the course of the film. At the end of the film, Wally and Eobard go head to head as Flash versus Reverse Flash. Wally gets pretty badly beaten, but he finds a way to defeat Eobard. I think in some way, you have Hunter Zolomon find a very beat up Flash, maybe his mask is all torn up, and he discovers that the Flash is Wally West. So now there are two non-metas that know of Wally's secret identity as the Flash, that being Linda Park and Hunter Zolomon. Wally isn't too worried about Hunter knowing his secret, as they've grown to be friends over the course of the film, and Wally sees Hunter as a valuable asset inside the Keystone City Police Department. Then we move on to our second Flash movie, with the movie being based loosely off of the New 52 Flash story, Guerrilla Warfare. So Guerrilla Warfare is volume 4 of the New 52 Flash run, and it focuses on Gorilla Grodd and his battalion invading Central City. The reason for Grodd's invasion is because Grodd believes his birthright is to have the Flash's Speed Force abilities, so he launches an all-out attack on the Flash. It's also worth mentioning that this story actually included Barry Allen as the Flash and not Wally West, but I don't feel like it matters that much. You can still use the general concept of a Gorilla City invasion for Grodd to be an antagonist to Wally West. The reason I say it would be loosely based on Guerrilla Warfare is because, to be honest, I don't find it to be all that interesting of a story. I think the overall concept of a Gorilla City invasion is interesting, and I do think Gorilla Grodd is a compelling villain, but I don't think he needs some prophecy of receiving Speed Force powers to go after the Flash. If you remember, a young Grodd was stopped by Barry Allen in his first attempt to overthrow Gorilla City a long time ago in our animated series. Grodd was much younger then, and he's much older, smarter, wiser, and more versed in combat now. He's also become much more respected in his ideals, and he has begun to gather more followers. He'd probably have been in prison for a while, and as a result would want revenge on the Flash. Now, obviously, the main reason he was stopped in his initial revolt was because of Barry Allen, but Wally West also played a part in taking down Grodd when he was just a teenager. Now he's a full-grown adult and the Flash, and I think Grodd would want to get revenge, causing him to invade Keystone City. I think you could also go back to the theme of Wally feeling like he has imposter syndrome like he did in the first movie, feeling like he's not good enough to live up to the legacy of Barry Allen as the Flash, and you could kind of have Grodd think that, where it's like he underestimates Wally as the Flash. He thinks Wally's not as good of a Flash, because the last time he saw him, he was just a reckless teenager, but now Wally is actually the Flash. I also think that the classic rogues would make their return in this film. The rogues are definitely villains, but if Keystone City was under attack, they would definitely help the Flash. Keystone City is their territory too, and like I said, they do have a moral code, so I have no doubt that they'd help. We'd also see Hunter Zolomon make a return in this film, doing his best to help Wally take down the invading gorillas. I don't know how he'd do that, but maybe he's like the comms guy, I don't know. In the end battle, Hunter would join Wally and the rogues in fighting the gorillas and Gorilla Grodd. Obviously, Hunter wouldn't have a hands-on role, but he'd be trying to help nonetheless. At some point, he'd get severely injured by Grodd, preventing him from being able to walk. The rogues and Wally would end up defeating Gorilla Grodd and the gorillas, and would restore order in Gorilla City for now. However, Wally's best friend Hunter Zolomon would be paralyzed from the waist down following his injury. In the hospital, Wally visits Hunter, who is in a very bad mental state. Hunter asks Wally to go back in time and prevent the incident from happening, but Wally refuses. This makes Hunter very angry as Wally leaves the hospital, and that is where we would wrap up our second film. Next, I wanted to spin off a bit from the speedster stories of Keystone City, and instead do another animated series, this time focused on the Rogues. The Rogues are some of my favorite villains in DC Comics. Yes, they're bad guys, but they have a moral compass, and they draw a line with certain things that they feel like they shouldn't do. They never cross that line that would make them considered supervillains. They try to avoid killing, and they especially try to leave innocent civilians out of the mix. I'm not one who's big on villain projects, but I think the Rogues' moral code makes them a really compelling contender for villains getting their own project. I also think that after seeing them help defend Keystone City in the Flash's second film, people would probably want to see more of them, especially Captain Cold. I would have the show focus on Cold and his group of rogues in a more standalone setting. Of course, the Flash would still be involved, but it would be in a minor or supporting role. As for the story, one of my favorite Flash stories in the Jeff Johns Flash run is Rogue War. Rogue War is a story where, as the title explains, the rogues go to war with one another. I'll be brief with it, and I will say I will be getting into some spoilers for this story, so just skip here if you don't want spoilers. But essentially, some of the rogues begin working with the CIA to take down the remaining rogues, which naturally causes division and an all-out war on both sides. On one side, you have Captain Cold, the new Captain Boomerang, the new Trickster, Mirror Master, and Weather Wizard, and on the other side, you have the original Trickster, Pied Piper, Quicksilver, Heatwave, and Magenta. I would love to see this show, and it's mainly for my love of Captain Cold. I feel like a lot of fans say he's just Mr. Freeze when he's actually very different. Freeze is a very tragic character who does what he does in hopes of one day finding a cure to his wife's disease, while Captain Cold is a career criminal who is a villain but has a strong moral code. He believes that the rogues are like family and that they should stick together, and he hates that he's been sold out by his former friends in this story. But yeah, I think people would love to see more of these characters after they helped Flash defend the city from Grodd's invasion, and I think this would be the perfect way to do it. Obviously, if you've read this story, it does get pretty insane towards the end with certain speedsters showing up, but we're not going to adapt that part of the story because it wouldn't make any sense with the story we're trying to tell in our third film. This story would just focus on the rogues going to war with each other. So now we have reached the third and final film in our Flash trilogy, which I would base on The Flash Blitz by Geoff Johns. If you've read the Geoff Johns Flash run, you've already figured out who the main villain of this film is. We've been setting him up since the first movie, and in this movie, he'll have reached his breaking point and fully turn evil. Before we get into it, I will warn of spoilers, and I'll give you like 5 seconds. In this storyline, Hunter Zolomon is devastated that he can no longer use his legs. He asks Wally to go back in time and fix it, but Wally refuses. So in Blitz, Hunter actually breaks into the Flash Museum and attempts to use the cosmic treadmill. It goes horribly wrong, and an accident occurs where he gains superhuman abilities. I had a couple people correct me in one of my videos when I explained his powers, and they were right, so I'll try to explain them correctly this time. Hunter does have super speed, he's able to run extremely fast like the other Flashes, but it isn't in the traditional sense. He, unlike the other speedsters, is not connected to the Speed Force. Instead, his accident with the cosmic treadmill gave him abilities to manipulate how time flows around him. So essentially, he can slow down his own timeline, making it appear that he's really fast, when in reality, he's just manipulating time around him. So in this story, Hunter is very angry and hurt by Wally's decision to not help him regain his ability to walk. Now that he's regained his ability to walk and has superhuman abilities, he wants to do everything in his power to make Wally feel tragedy like he did, which will in turn make Wally a better superhero. It's really sadistic, like pretty much anything all of the Reverse Flashes do, and he goes after Wally's lover Linda Park. In the original storyline, he actually causes Linda to have a miscarriage, which I guess is the tragedy that Hunter wanted Wally to feel to turn him into a better superhero. This movie would be the culmination of Hunter and Wally's friendship up to this point. We saw them meet each other in the first film, with Hunter becoming a close ally to Wally within the Keystone City Police Department. Hunter also found out Wally was the Flash at the end of that film. Then he'd do his best to fend off Gorilla Grodd from Keystone City, but he'd be severely injured, preventing him from using his legs. He asks Wally to go back in time to reverse the accident, but Wally refuses. Hunter feels betrayed by this, and it drives him mad, prompting him to try and do it himself, but he fails and causes a major accident, leaving him with time manipulation powers. Hunter would feel betrayed after everything he'd sacrificed for Wally, and Wally refusing to help him. It would be the ultimate clash, and it's a story I'd love to see on the big screen. I know Eobard Thawne is like the end-all be-all of Reverse Flashes, but I do really like Hunter Zolomon. I love how he starts as a good friend to Wally and a close ally of his in the police department, and then as Geoff Johns' Flash run goes on, Wally and Hunter get closer, and you understand why Hunter is so angry. He's helped Wally along the way the entire time, and then when he feels like he needs help from Wally, Wally refuses. You understand both sides, and I think it's a really compelling arc, and I would love to see it on the big screen. I know that that's now 2 movies where we have the Reverse Flash as the villain, but I do feel like Eobard and Hunter Zolomon are very different characters, and I think it would work fine, especially with the build-up over the first 2 movies that Hunter and Wally are really close friends. I would also bring in Bart Allen, also known as Impulse. He's the grandson of Barry Allen from the 30th century, and in a lot of ways is the Kid Flash of Wally West. He gets the name Impulse for being extremely reckless, and part of that is due to the way he was raised. Bart unexplainably aged very rapidly, and was placed into a simulation where his age rate could be controlled. Eventually, he is sent to the past, where Wally West is able to find a cure for his age rate. He ends up staying in this time period, training under the Flash family, and also becoming part of the Teen Titans. He's a pretty cool character, and he has a really good solo series written by Mark Waid. It would also be cool to see Wally going from being the Kid Flash himself to getting his own and mentoring his own Kid Flash. I also think because this is our final Flash film, either Max Mercury or Jay Garrick has to die. I'm leaning more towards Max because he's kind of like the Yoda of the Speed Force, and I think Wally needs to be put through the ringer in this film by Hunter, so maybe Max makes a sacrifice at some point to save Linda. In the end, Wally is able to defeat Hunter, but it comes with a price. He loses one of his most valuable mentors in Max Mercury, and I think in the end, to save his wife, he'd likely have to kill his former best friend Hunter Zolomon as well. Anyways guys, that's all I have for the DCU Flash saga. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you so much for 10K. Please leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.